In the shadowed annals of Greek mythology, where memory blurs into legend and legend hardens into fate, few names burn as fiercely as Prometheus. His story does not begin with a throne, a thunderbolt, or a conquest. It begins with a question, a hesitation, a mind that paused where others rushed forward. In a cosmos ruled by force, Prometheus was defined by thought. He was neither king nor conqueror, neither fully god nor fully mortal. He did not command the seas, preside over the dead, or split the sky with lightning. His power was quieter, and therefore more dangerous. Prometheus did not dominate the world, he understood it, and in a universe governed by beings who believed strength was synonymous with right, understanding was a subversive act. His legacy, unlike those of the Olympian rulers, could not be confined to temples or territories. It traveled invisibly, carried in every hearth fire that warmed a family through winter, in every forge where metal yielded to human will, in every spark struck against darkness by hands that refused to remain helpless. Long after the names of tyrants faded, Prometheus endured, not as a ruler remembered, but as a gift inherited. He became the first great martyr of knowledge, the archetype of rebellion not through violence, but through generosity. Prometheus was born before Olympus was crowned, before Zeus learned the weight of a throne or the cost of holding it. The world into which he emerged was ancient, unfinished, and unstable, a cosmos still trembling from its own creation. His father was P.I.T.A, one of the elder Titans, a figure associated not with raw elements like sky or sea, but with something subtler and more unsettling, mortality. P.I.T.A stood at the boundary between permanence and decay, between the eternal and the fleeting. Through him, Prometheus inherited an awareness rare among immortals, the knowledge that all things, even gods, are subject to consequence. His mother is named variously as Cronus or Asia, both Oceanids, daughters of the vast, encircling waters that flowed endlessly around the world. From her came fluidity, adaptability, and a connection to change itself. Where the Titans often embodied static forces, mountain, storm, abyss, Prometheus carried within him the logic of currents, the understanding that nothing remains as it is, that power shifts, erodes, and reforms. From this union came 4 sons, each a different answer to the question of power and fate. Atlas, the eldest, was unmatched in strength. His muscles were monuments, his endurance legendary. Yet when the old order fell, it was Atlas who was condemned to bear the heavens upon his shoulders for eternity. His punishment was symbolic as much as it was physical. Strength without foresight becomes burden. Atlas could hold the sky, but he could not see beyond the present moment. He reacted, he endured, he suffered. And he learned too late that power without understanding invites endless labor with no release. Menishus, by contrast, was violence given form. Where Atlas was steadfast, Menishus was reckless, driven by arrogance and rage, convinced that might alone could bend the cosmos to his will. He charged blindly against Zeus during the Titanomachy, scorning strategy and prophecy alike. The thunderbolt that struck him down was swift and absolute. His end was a lesson written in lightning. Hubris does not merely fail, it is erased. Prometheus, whose name meant afterthought, occupied a gentler but no less tragic space. He was kind, eager, and disastrously slow to recognize consequence. Prometheus acted first and understood later, often when understanding could no longer change the outcome. It was he who accepted Pandora, and with her the jar of sorrows that would forever alter the human condition. His was the tragedy of good intentions and tempered by foresight, a reminder that innocence alone does not shield the world from harm. And then there was Prometheus. His name meant forethought, and it was not merely a description, it was a burden. Where his brothers embodied reaction, endurance, violence, or regret, Prometheus embodied anticipation. He did not simply witness events as they unfolded. He perceived their trajectories, the invisible hinges upon which history would turn. He saw not only what was, but what would be, and what must be prevented. This gift isolated him. To see the future is to live perpetually out of step with the present. Prometheus watched his fellow Titans revel in their dominance, blind to the instability beneath their feet. He watched Zeus rise, brilliant and ambitious, carrying within him the same seeds of paranoia that had doomed Cronus. He watched humanity struggle, fragile and fleeting, yet brimming with unrealized potential that even the gods failed to recognize. Prometheus understood something fundamental that others did not. Power that cannot imagine a future beyond itself will always turn inward, devouring what it fears. Knowledge, by contrast, multiplies when shared. It weakens tyranny precisely because it cannot be owned. This awareness would shape every choice he made. It would guide his defection during the Titanomachy, his alliance with Zeus even as he distrusted the throne Zeus sought. It would compel his compassion for humanity, his willingness to deceive a god, to steal fire, to endure agony without surrendering the knowledge that could save him, and it would curse him to loneliness, because foresight rarely earns gratitude from those it protects. Prometheus did not merely suffer for humanity. He suffered because he understood humanity's future. He knew what they could become, and he knew the cost of denying them the means to grow. Forethought, in the end, was both his greatest strength and his deepest curse. Prometheus entered a cosmos still raw from creation, a world not yet settled into rules or rhythms. The earth had hardened, the seas had found their basins, and the sky had arched itself over UHD, but meaning had not yet followed form. Existence was loud, violent, and unfinished. Mountains still shifted as if undecided, storms roamed without season, life emerged, vanished, and re-emerged again under indifferent skies. This was the age of the Titans. They did not rule through law or covenant, nor did they govern by balance or consent. Their authority came from elemental dominance, earth-crushing sky, time-devouring possibility, strength-enforcing silence. They were vast and ancient, embodiments of forces rather than ideas, and they saw no need to justify their power. To rule was simply to endure longer than one's rivals. At their head stood Cronus, king of the Titans, a god shaped not by wisdom but by fear. He had overthrown his own father, Uranus, in a brutal act of betrayal, and the memory of that violence haunted him. A prophecy followed him like a shadow. One of your own children will do to you what you did to your father. Cronus did not seek to outgrow this warning or avert it through change. He sought only to prevent it through annihilation. And so, when his children were born, bright, radiant gods, each carrying the spark of a future Cronus could not control, he devoured them. Not slain, not erased, swallowed whole. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, each was consumed at birth, imprisoned within their father's living body, their potential folded inward, their existence reduced to a threat neutralized. Cronus believed this was victory. In truth, it was stagnation. The cosmos did not advance under his rule. It coiled inward, hoarding power, suffocating possibility. This was an age defined by paranoia. Power existed solely to preserve itself. There was no vision of tomorrow, only the desperate maintenance of today. Fear dictated policy. Suspicion replaced trust. Every new thing was a danger. Every change was an enemy. Prometheus watched this with growing unease. He did not recoil in horror as a mortal might, nor did he rage blindly as some titans did. He observed. He studied the patterns forming beneath the chaos. He noticed how fear narrowed Cronus's world, how every act of preservation made the future more fragile, not less. He saw that devouring his children did not eliminate the prophecy. It merely delayed it, compressing fate into a tighter, more volatile form. Unlike many of his kin, Prometheus did not delight in domination. He found no satisfaction in crushing weaker beings beneath cosmic weight. Where other titans equated rule with obedience, Prometheus questioned the stability of such a system. He understood something they did not. Terror can enforce silence, but it cannot inspire loyalty, growth, or continuity. A world ruled by fear eventually turns on itself. Then came Rhea, Cronus's wife, sister, and silent witness to his madness. Rhea watched her children disappear one by one into her husband's jaws. Grief hardened into resolve. When she bore her youngest child, she chose defiance. She hid the infant, Zeus, and wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes, feeding the deception to Cronus. The king of the Titans swallowed the stone without question, too consumed by fear to recognize the hollowness of his triumph. Prometheus understood the moment immediately. This was not merely a clever trick, it was a fracture in inevitability. A future had slipped through Cronus's grasp. Power built on fear, Prometheus knew, always plants the seeds of its own destruction. The very paranoia meant to prevent overthrow creates the conditions for it. By refusing to trust, Cronus ensured that rebellion would be hidden. By consuming his children, he guaranteed that when liberation came, it would be absolute. Zeus grew in secret, far from the choking atmosphere of Cronus's court. He was nursed by nymphs, protected by nature itself, raised in places untouched by Titan authority. The P.I.T.s, armored warriors, clashed their shields whenever the child cried, masking his voice so that no echo of his existence could reach Cronus's ears. It was a childhood forged in concealment, resilience, and necessity. Prometheus watched Zeus's ascent with measured attention. He did not romanticize the child or assume his virtue. He recognized in Zeus both promise and danger. The boy was clever, charismatic, and ambitious, traits that could liberate the cosmos or merely reshape its chains. Prometheus understood that overthrowing tyranny did not automatically create justice. The question was never who rules, but how. When Zeus finally emerged, armed not only with strength, but with allies, strategy, and patience, the cosmos shuddered. The old order did not collapse quietly, it screamed. War followed. The Titanomachy erupted like a reckoning long delayed. Heaven and earth clashed, ancient forces tearing at one another with the violence of inevitability finally fulfilled. Mountains were hurled, seas boiled, the sky itself fractured under the weight of competing claims to authority. And Prometheus, standing at the crossroads of foresight and consequence, knew that the age of Titans was ending. Not because they were weak, but because they had refused to imagine a future beyond themselves. The Titanomachy was not merely a battle, it was a reckoning written into the bones of the cosmos, a war so vast that it redrew the shape of reality itself. For 10 unbroken years, heaven and earth turned against one another, locked in a struggle that had been brewing since the first prophecy was spoken aloud. This was not war as mortals would later understand it, with marching armies and measured campaigns. This was creation colliding with itself. Mountains were torn from their roots and hurled like missiles across the sky, shattering continents where they fell. Seas boiled under divine fury, their depths churning into chaos as gods and titans struck them with unchecked force. Rivers reversed their flow, forests ignited without flame. The sky itself cracked open, thunder rolling endlessly as Zeus's lightning met the raw, untamed power of the elder gods. Night and day lost their meaning beneath the constant glare of battle. The Titans fought as they always had, directly, overwhelmingly, with the confidence of beings who had never known defeat. They were ancient, colossal embodiments of elemental force. When they struck, the world trembled. When they roared, the mountains answered. To them, war was an extension of dominance. Meet strength with greater strength and crush whatever resists. But the Olympians were different. They were younger, leaner, less certain, and therefore more adaptable. Zeus, newly risen and hungry for a throne, did not mistake brute force for inevitability. He understood something that Prometheus had always known and the Titans had never bothered to learn. Strength alone is blunt. It can destroy, but it cannot coordinate. It can overwhelm, but it cannot endure without support. Wars are not won by muscles. They are won by alliances. Prometheus watched the early years of the conflict with a calculating eye. He saw Titans charging headlong into battle, confident that sheer power would carry the day. He saw Olympians falter, retreat, regroup, and return with adjustments. Where the Titans repeated themselves, Zeus learned. Where the Titans relied on terror, Zeus experimented with loyalty. Prometheus defected. The choice was irreversible. There was no neutrality in a war of this magnitude. By crossing over, Prometheus severed himself from the old order forever. He did not defect out of devotion to Zeus, nor out of hatred for Cronus alone. He defected because he understood trajectory. The Titans could not win, not because they were weak, but because they were incapable of change. This followed, more out of trust in his brother than conviction. Prometheus, however, arrived bearing something far more dangerous than raw strength. He arrived bearing insight. It was Prometheus who urged Zeus to free the Clopes, the one-eyed mastersmiths whom Cronus had imprisoned in fear of their ingenuity. Shackled and forgotten in the depths of Tartarus, they were living embodiments of potential suppressed. When Zeus released them, they repaid him not with allegiance alone, but with innovation. From their forges came the weapons that would define the war. Thunderbolts that split mountains. Lightning that could strike with precision rather than indiscriminate force. Earthquakes that could be summoned at will. Power refined. Prometheus then pressed further, advising Zeus to release the Hecatoenchires, the hundred-handed giants whose very existence defied order. Where Titans fought in singular blows and Olympians in coordinated strikes, the Hecatoenchires fought as chaos incarnate. Each could hurl 100 boulders at once, turning battlefields into storms of stone. Titan formations shattered under the sheer unpredictability of their assault. Strength could not adapt fast enough to chaos. The war shifted. But the final blow would not come from force alone. Prometheus studied Cronus the way a strategist studies a fortress. He observed patterns in his movements, rhythms in his patrols, habits born of overconfidence. Cronus had ruled too long without challenge. He did not imagine vulnerability because he had never needed to. His stronghold was formidable, but not perfect. Prometheus revealed the cracks. He told Zeus where Cronus lingered too long, where his guards were ceremonial rather than vigilant, where arrogance had replaced caution. He understood that Cronus's greatest weakness was not physical, it was psychological. The king of the Titans could not conceive of being overthrown again. That blind spot was fatal. When the final confrontation came, it was swift and decisive. Zeus did not merely strike his father down. He ended him in the same language Cronus had once used against Cronus: castration, exile, and erasure from power. Cronus was cast into Tartarus, not as a ruler fallen, but as a warning entombed. The cycle had turned. And it was not merely Zeus's strength that ended the Titan king. It was Prometheus's foresight. When the dust settled, Olympus rose from the wreckage of the old order, gleaming and absolute. The world reorganized itself around new gods, new hierarchies, new promises. The Olympians crowned themselves custodians of balance and law, proclaiming an age of order after the chaos of Titan rule. Prometheus stood among them, victorious and already uneasy. He had helped end tyranny, but he had lived long enough to know that victory often wears the mask of virtue before revealing its teeth. With the Titans defeated and Tartarus sealed, Zeus crowned himself king of the gods. The act was swift, decisive, and framed as necessity rather than ambition. The cosmos, scarred by a decade of war, yearned for stability. Zeus offered order, and the world accepted his rule not because it was flawless, but because it promised an end to chaos. Power was divided with ceremonial precision. Claimed the seas, his trident striking the waters as borders were drawn across the deep. The oceans bent to his moods, swelling or calming at his command. Hades took the underworld, a realm not of punishment alone but of inevitability, where the dead would go quietly and remain. The skies, the storms, the law of gods and mortals alike, all remained with Zeus. The Olympians spoke of balance, they spoke of justice, they spoke of a new age. They also built distance. Mount Olympus rose high and remote, a deliberate separation between gods and the world below. No longer would divine power walk openly among the earth as the Titans had done. Worship would now flow upward through sacrifice and prayer, not conversation. Mortals would be seen, but not known. Law replaced raw dominance, but hierarchy replaced kinship. The gods were no longer forces of nature alone. They were administrators of existence. Each domain had rules, each god had authority, and Zeus stood above them all, thunderbolt in hand, arbiter and enforcer of divine will. Prometheus watched carefully. He had helped overthrow tyranny, yet the shape of power forming before him was uncomfortably familiar. Zeus spoke often of justice, but he wielded fear with practiced ease. His lightning was not merely a weapon, it was a reminder. Obedience was rewarded lavishly, rebellion punished without hesitation. The memory of the Titanomachy lingered in every decree, every warning disguised as law. Prometheus recognized the pattern. The names had changed, the rhetoric had softened, but the foundation remained the same. Power centralized, dissent discouraged, authority enforced through awe and terror. Zeus did not devour his children as Cronus had, but he learned from that mistake. He ruled through control rather than consumption, through spectacle rather than silence. The Olympians believed themselves enlightened because they were not the Titans. Prometheus knew better. He understood that tyranny does not always announce itself with cruelty. Sometimes it arrives draped in order, justified by necessity, praised for ending chaos. Sometimes it insists that fear is merely discipline, that punishment is the same as justice. The new gods differed from the old less than they believed. And so Prometheus's gaze shifted, away from Olympus and downward, toward the fragile beings living beneath the gods' notice. Toward humanity. They were weak, transient, and easily overlooked, but Prometheus saw what others did not. Where the Olympians saw subjects, he saw possibility. Where they saw worshippers, he saw thinkers yet unborn. Humanity was not a threat to divine power, but ignorance was a guarantee of eternal subjugation. If the gods would not change, then the balance of the world would have to shift elsewhere. It was then, quietly, deliberately, that Prometheus chose a different allegiance. Not to gods, but to the future. Accounts vary, as all ancient truths do, but many traditions credit Prometheus with shaping humankind from clay, soft earth mixed with water, gathered from riverbanks where the land was still young and pliable. He knelt where soil met stream, hands pressed into the raw substance of the world, and began to form shapes that mirrored the gods but lacked their permanence. Upright figures emerged beneath his touch, spines straight, faces lifted, eyes set forward rather than down. They were not meant to crawl, they were meant to look ahead. Some stories say that Athena, goddess of wisdom, knelt beside him. Where Prometheus shaped the body, she breathed into it awareness, reason, curiosity, the hunger to understand. Others insist Prometheus worked alone, infusing his creations with a stolen echo of divine fire even before the theft that would later define him. Whether sculptor or steward, collaborator or lone architect, Prometheus became something unprecedented in the cosmic order. He became an advocate. Early humans were fragile things. They woke beneath skies that did not care whether they lived or died. They shivered naked in the cold, their skin thin and easily broken. They had no claws to defend themselves, no fangs to tear flesh, no fur to ward off winter, no venom to deter attackers. Their bodies were compromises, adaptable, yes, but unfinished. Night brought terror. Predators with glowing eyes stalked them in the darkness, teeth honed by evolution that had passed them by. They ate what they could, often raw and dangerous. They lived briefly, fell ill easily, and died without ceremony. Their dead vanished into the earth without names, without memory, without meaning. Survival was not guaranteed, and tomorrow was a concept too fragile to trust. To the Olympians, humanity was an afterthought. A curiosity, perhaps, a source of worship, eventually. Something small and fleeting, unworthy of sustained attention. Mortals were fragile by design, proof of divine superiority, not a challenge to it. The gods did not hate humans, they simply did not see them. Prometheus saw nothing else. Where the Olympians saw weakness, he saw potential coiled tightly within limitation. Humans could not overpower the world, but they could understand it. They could not outrun predators, but they could plan. They could not survive alone, but together, they could become something new. Their fragility was not a flaw, it was an invitation to ingenuity. And so Prometheus taught. He taught them to read the stars, not as gods scattered across the sky, but as patterns, guides that mark seasons and direction. He taught them to track the passage of time, to notice the rhythms of growth and decay, to plant when the earth was ready and harvest before it turned cruel. He taught them to count, not merely objects, but days, years, generations. He gave them language. Not just sounds, but symbols, words that could hold memory, grief, promise. With speech came story, and with story came identity. Humans began to remember not only what they were, but what they had been, and what they might become. He showed them how to build shelters, shaping wood and stone into protection rather than hiding. He taught them to hunt not as lone, desperate creatures, but cooperatively, sharing risk and reward. He showed them how to tame animals, not through domination, but through patience and mutual benefit. Perhaps most radical of all, he taught them how to bury their dead. Not as refuse returned to the soil, but as lives acknowledged. Bodies were laid to rest with intention. Stones were stacked, marks were made, the dead were remembered, and in remembering them, the living learned that existence was more than endurance, it had meaning. Each lesson was small. Each lesson was quiet. And each lesson was a rebellion. Prometheus did not raise armies. He did not challenge Olympus openly. He altered the balance of the world one human at a time, seeding knowledge where ignorance had ensured obedience. He gave mortals the tools to survive without divine intervention, and in doing so, he made them less dependent on the gods. But knowledge, once given, does not remain unnoticed. Firelight glows in the dark, and the gods, eventually, always look down. Zeus demanded sacrifice. Not as a request, not as a negotiation, but as an assertion of order. The war was over, Olympus stood unchallenged. The gods required acknowledgement, not merely worship, but submission made visible through ritual. Sacrifice would define the boundary between mortal and divine, between those who commanded existence and those who endured it. And so, at Mecone, gods and mortals gathered. It was a liminal place, neither wholly sacred nor entirely profane, chosen precisely because it stood between worlds. Here, the rules of the new age would be set. Here, the relationship between Olympus and humanity would be formalized, not through treaty, but through tradition. What was decided at Mecone would echo through generations, repeated so often it would feel eternal. An ox was brought forth, massive and healthy, its strength a testament to human labor and care. Its death was swift, solemn, and heavy with implication. This was not merely an animal offered to the gods, it was a question made flesh. Who would benefit from the labor of humanity? Zeus turned to Prometheus. It was no accident. Prometheus had become the intermediary between gods and mortals, whether the Olympians liked it or not. He understood humans, he understood ritual, and Zeus, confident in his authority, allowed him the honor and the risk of dividing the offering. Prometheus approached the carcass with deliberate calm. He did not rush, he did not smirk. This was not a trick born of impulse. It was a calculation shaped by foresight. He separated the ox into two portions, equal in weight but not in worth, knowing that appearances often matter more than truth to those accustomed to power. One heap contained the rich meat and vital organs, the nourishment that sustained life. He concealed them beneath the animal's stomach and coarse hide, wrapping value in ugliness, substance in something easily dismissed. The other heap he arranged with care. Bare bones were stacked neatly and draped in thick, glistening fat, white and luminous in the sun. It was beautiful, clean, worthless. Prometheus stepped back. The choice was offered. Zeus chose the latter. Whether he was deceived outright or knowingly affronted remains debated even among the gods. Perhaps he suspected trickery but believed his authority would make the outcome irrelevant. Perhaps he simply saw splendor and assumed abundance followed. Power often mistakes display for substance. When the truth was revealed, the insult was unmistakable. From that moment on, the structure of sacrifice was set. Humans would burn bones and fat to the gods, sending smoke and scent skyward as tribute, while keeping the nourishing meat for themselves. The gods would receive honor, ritual, and remembrance, but not sustenance. Sacrifice became symbolic rather than literal, an offering of respect rather than survival. It was a subtle shift, and therefore a profound one. Prometheus had elevated humanity without naming it rebellion. He had ensured that mortals would not starve to feed gods who did not need food. He had encoded compassion into custom, embedding defiance so deeply into ritual that it could not be undone without unraveling tradition itself. Zeus understood this instantly. His rage was not merely wounded pride, it was the recognition of precedent. Prometheus had rewritten the terms of obedience. The gods would still be honored, but humanity would no longer be diminished by that honor. The balance had shifted, quietly, irrevocably. Zeus could tolerate rebellion from Titans. They were his equals in scale, his rivals in mythic weight. Their defiance fit the old patterns of cosmic struggle. But rebellion that empowered mortals? That was intolerable, because it suggested a future Zeus could not fully control. And Zeus, for all his talk of justice and order, had inherited one truth from Cronus that he could never quite escape. Power forgives many things, but it never forgives being outgrown. To punish humanity, Zeus withdrew fire. The decree fell without ceremony. There was no thunderous announcement, no warning carried on the wind. One night the flames simply failed. Hearths dimmed, embers cooled to ash, sparks struck from stone died instantly, as if the world itself had decided to forget how to burn. Without fire, humanity unraveled. Food, once transformed by heat, turned treacherous. Raw flesh sickened the weak, roots and grains remained hard and indigestible. Illness spread through camps that had only just begun to call themselves villages. Cold crept in silently, killing infants first, then the old, then anyone too slow or too alone to endure the night. Darkness reclaimed the world. Predators returned to the edges of human sight, eyes glowing beyond the reach of fear, shadows lengthened, pressing inward. Without flame, there was no boundary between safety and wilderness, no circle of light to push back the unknown. The fragile architecture of early civilization, tools, memory, cooperation, began to collapse under the weight of a single absence. Humanity teetered on extinction. Prometheus watched. He saw what Zeus intended, not annihilation, but correction. Fire had made humans bold, inventive, less dependent. Its removal was meant to remind them of their place, to teach them humility through suffering. Zeus believed fear would restore balance. Prometheus understood something Zeus did not. Fear does not teach wisdom, it teaches desperation. And desperation either breaks a species, or forces it to evolve beyond control. Prometheus did not hesitate. He did not argue before the throne. He did not plead for mercy or appeal to justice. He had learned long ago that power rarely listens when its authority feels threatened. Instead, he acted. Under cover of night, while Olympus slept in the complacent certainty of its own supremacy, Prometheus climbed. The ascent was perilous even for a Titan. Olympus was not merely a mountain. It was a boundary between mortal and divine, a place where air thinned into something sharper, heavier with presence. Stars wheeled over it like watchful eyes. Winds whispered warnings. Every step upward carried consequence. There are different tellings of what followed. Some say Prometheus crept into the forge of Hephaestus, where eternal flames danced within braziers of celestial bronze. Fires that did not consume fuel, fires that were ideas given heat. Others claim he stole from the blazing chariot of Zeus, capturing a fragment of the sun itself as it crossed the sky. The truth matters less than the meaning. Fire was not taken lightly. Prometheus did not seize it like a weapon. He did not brandish it in triumph. He concealed it carefully, reverently, within the hollow stalk of a giant fennel plant, humble, organic, alive. Even in theft, he chose a vessel that symbolized continuity rather than domination. The fire was not meant to scorch the world, it was meant to live within it. He descended unseen. When Prometheus returned to humanity, he did not announce himself with thunder or spectacle. He gathered them quietly, in caves, in clearings, along riverbanks where despair had begun to settle like fog. He revealed the flames slowly, letting its light spread across faces hollowed by hunger and fear. Fire flickered back into existence, and the world changed. Metal bent beneath heat, yielding to human intention for the first time. Clay hardened into vessels that could store food, water, memory. Wounds were cauterized. Illness was driven back by boiling and smoke. Night retreated, its dominance broken by circles of flame that marked places of safety and belonging. But fire did more than transform matter. It transformed minds. Around hearths, humans began to tell stories, not merely to pass time, but to preserve meaning. Knowledge could now be shared after sunset. Experience could be carried beyond a single lifespan. Fire became the anchor of memory, the first archive of civilization. Fire was warmth. Fire was protection. Fire was time extended beyond daylight. It became understanding itself, the visible manifestation of thought made powerful enough to alter the world. Prometheus had given humanity more than survival. He had given them momentum. And in doing so, he crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Because fire does not belong to anyone forever. Once given, it spreads. And Zeus, looking down from Olympus at the growing constellation of human lights, knew with terrible clarity that something irreversible had been set in motion. The flame could be punished. The giver could be broken. But the knowledge, that would never return to the dark. Zeus's retaliation was merciless. It did not come in the heat of anger, nor in a fit of uncontrolled rage. It came cold, measured, and absolute. Punishment designed not merely to hurt, but to end an idea. Zeus understood that Prometheus's crime was not theft alone. Fire could be reclaimed, humanity could be cowed. What could not be tolerated was precedent, the notion that defiance could succeed. Prometheus was seized. Chaos and strength and force made flesh, dragged him from the world he had reshaped. There was no trial, no appeal. Olympus did not justify itself to traitors. Prometheus was hauled eastward, away from worship, away from memory, to the edges of the known world where even gods felt distant. They brought him to the Caucasus Mountains. There, the world thinned into ice and stone. Peaks rose like broken teeth against a merciless sky. Winds screamed through ravines as if the earth itself protested what was about to be done. Snow buried sound, distance swallowed hope. This was not merely exile, it was erasure. Upon a sheer cliff face overlooking endless chasms, Atreus was summoned to do the unthinkable. Bound by obedience and guilt alike, the smith god forged chains of adamant. Metal that could not break, could not bend, could not forget its purpose. He worked in silence, each strike of his hammer echoing like an apology he could not speak. Prometheus did not struggle. He understood the weight of inevitability. Resistance would only confirm Zeus's narrative of treachery. The chains closed around his wrists and ankles. A spike was driven through his chest, pinning him to the rock as if he were an offering nailed to the world itself. His body was spread wide, exposed to sky and storm, unable to turn away from sun or snow. There would be no darkness to hide in, no night that fully belonged to him. And then came the true sentence. Each dawn, as the world stirred awake, Zeus's eagle descended. It was no ordinary bird. It was vast, sacred, and relentless. Wings that eclipsed the sun, talons that gouged stone, a beak honed not for mercy but precision. The eagle did not kill. It did not need to. Immortality made death impossible. Instead, it fed. With ritual cruelty, it tore into Prometheus's side, ripping open flesh to reach his liver, the seat of life, regeneration, and vitality. Blood spilled down the cliff face, staining the mountain as if the earth itself bled in sympathy. The pain was absolute, consuming, designed to overwhelm thought itself. Prometheus screamed. The sound echoed through the valleys, a raw, inhuman cry that sent animals fleeing and silenced the wind. It was agony without escape, suffering inflicted not to end life, but to stretch it beyond endurance. And yet, each night, beneath the cold stars, his body healed. The liver regrew, flesh knitted itself whole, the wound sealed cleanly, betraying him back into wholeness. By dawn, he was intact again, ready for the eagle's return. Pain without end. Punishment without release. Zeus had engineered eternity into suffering, believing that repetition would break even the strongest will. This was not meant merely to punish Prometheus. It was meant to warn the universe. This is what happens to those who empower the weak. This is the cost of foresight misused. Yet Prometheus did not beg. He did not plead for mercy or recant his gift. He did not curse humanity for the suffering he endured on their behalf. Instead, he endured. He watched centuries pass as moments. Empires rose and fell beyond his sight. Generations of mortals lived entire lives between the eagle's visits. And during that endless torment, Prometheus did something Zeus could not anticipate. He remained dangerous. Wanderers came to the Caucasus, exiles, cursed beings, lost souls driven to the edges of the world. To them, Prometheus spoke. He told of futures not yet written, of paths still open. He foretold the wanderings of Io, transformed and tormented, mapping the shape of lands yet unnamed. His words traveled outward, carried by those who survived him. And he guarded a secret. A prophecy older than Olympus, whispered to him by Themis or Dewey, depending on the telling. A truth that gnawed at Zeus far more painfully than the eagle gnawed at Prometheus. Prometheus knew that Zeus's reign was not secure. He knew of a union that would produce a son greater than his father. He knew that Zeus, like Cronus before him, stood at the edge of repetition, and Prometheus refused to speak the prophecy aloud, not out of spite, but out of principle. Zeus could command pain. He could command silence. But he could not command knowledge freely given. So Prometheus endured the mountain, the chains, the bird, and the centuries, not as a broken traitor, but as a living contradiction to tyranny. Chained, bleeding, and alone, he remained what he had always been. A mind that could not be conquered, and a future that refused to be extinguished. Deliverance did not come quickly, nor did it arrive with celebration. It came through Heracles, a figure forged in suffering, contradiction, and impossible labors. A hero who understood, perhaps better than any other, the cost of defying divine order while remaining bound to it. On his long path through the world, Burdened with tasks meant to humble him and cleanse the stain of his own violence, Heracles passed through the remote reaches of the Caucasus. There, he saw what few were meant to witness. A Titan nailed to stone. Prometheus hung where sky met abyss, his body scarred beyond recognition, yet unbroken in posture. Blood darkened the rock beneath him. Chains gleamed coldly in the thin light, and above him circled the eagle, patient, eternal, obedient to cruelty. Heracles did not hesitate. Whether moved by pity, recognition, or something deeper, an instinctive kinship between those punished beyond measure, he raised his bow. The arrow flew true, tipped with the venom of the Hydra, and struck the eagle mid-descent. The creature fell screaming into the chasm. Its reign of terror ended in a single moment of decisive mercy. The mountain fell silent. Heracles approached the bound Titan, and with brute strength and heroic resolve, shattered the unbreakable. Adamant chains broke like brittle things beneath the weight of purpose. The spike was torn free. Stone cracked. For the first time in uncounted centuries, Prometheus's body was no longer anchored to suffering. Zeus allowed it. This was no act of rebellion, not entirely. By this point, Zeus had already averted his own prophesied downfall. Warned at last of As, he had avoided siring a son who would surpass him, marrying her instead to a mortal and sealing fate safely away from his throne. The danger Prometheus represented had been neutralized, and mercy could now masquerade as magnanimity. Power, once secure, can afford generosity. Prometheus was freed. But freedom did not restore what had been taken. His body bore the memory of endless pain. His spirit carried centuries of isolation, the knowledge of time stretched thin by suffering. He stepped back into the world altered, not diminished, but irrevocably reshaped. Some stories say a fragment of the mountain remained bound to him, fashioned into a ring as a symbolic reminder that even liberation leaves marks behind. What became of him afterward is uncertain. Some say Prometheus accepted mortality, exchanging immortality for release, choosing an end over eternity chained to memory. Others say he faded into myth, withdrawing from gods and mortals alike, his work complete, his presence no longer required. Perhaps he walked among humans unseen, perhaps he simply became story. But his fire never went out. It lived on in human hands, in every forge and furnace, in every idea that refused to remain obedient to ignorance. It burned in invention, in curiosity, in defiance shaped not by destruction but by understanding. Prometheus did not need a throne to endure. He did not need worship. He had given the world a force that could not be reclaimed. And though his chains were broken, it was never his body that defined him, but the flame he trusted to others, knowing it would outlive him. In that, Prometheus was finally unbound. Prometheus did not leave behind temples that demanded silence or laws enforced by fear. He left behind something far more dangerous to absolute power: inheritance. His legacy did not belong to priests or kings or even to the gods who punished him. It belonged to anyone who learned, questioned, remembered, and refused to remain small. In the centuries that followed his liberation, measured by mortals in lifetimes, by gods in passing moods, Prometheus became more than a titan. He became an idea. His name was spoken in whispers by philosophers and in defiance by poets. He was invoked whenever authority demanded obedience without explanation, whenever suffering was justified as necessary, whenever power insisted it was eternal. He became the symbol of rebellion against unjust authority, not rebellion born of chaos or destruction, but rebellion rooted in understanding. Prometheus did not tear down Olympus. He did something far more subversive. He made its dominance negotiable. By giving humans knowledge, he introduced comparison. Once people could imagine alternatives, tyranny could no longer present itself as fate. He stood as the champion of intellect over brute force, of foresight over reaction, of compassion over control. Where Zeus ruled by spectacle and fear, Prometheus trusted in accumulation. Small lessons compounding across generations. He believed that progress did not arrive fully formed, but grew slowly, painfully, through mistakes, memory, and persistence. And progress, he proved, demands sacrifice. Not symbolic sacrifice offered upward to appease distant powers, but real sacrifice borne by those who refuse to accept the world as it is handed to them. Prometheus's punishment was not incidental to his legacy, it was central to it. His suffering became a warning etched into myth. Knowledge carries cost, and those who give it freely will be punished by those who profit from ignorance. Yet he never recanted. He never asked humanity to regret the gift. He taught humans how to stand upright, not just in body, but in spirit. Upright meant looking forward instead of downward. It meant remembering the past without being trapped by it. It meant understanding that survival was not the highest aim, that meaning, dignity, and curiosity mattered just as much. To stand upright was to accept uncertainty rather than surrender to fear. To stand upright was to believe that tomorrow could be shaped, not merely endured. Even now, every flame carries his defiance. It flickers in laboratories and libraries, in workshops and kitchens, in protests lit by torches and quiet rooms warmed by candles. It burns in every question that unsettles authority, in every idea that refuses to stay contained, in every moment where someone chooses understanding over obedience. Fire still teaches what Prometheus always knew. Light reveals, heat transforms, and once darkness is pushed back, it never quite returns to what it was. And somewhere, beneath the noise of modern life, beneath the glow of 1,000 borrowed suns, the fire still remembers who first gave it to us. It remembers the Titan who saw the future and chose it anyway. It remembers the cost paid so others could learn. It remembers that knowledge was never meant to be hoarded. And as long as humans strike sparks against the dark, Prometheus remains, unchained, unforgotten, and alive in every act of defiant understanding.